Would you pray with me? Speak to us, O God, that as we enter this new year, as we enter this new season of Advent, you would prepare our hearts for your great and glorious day. Amen. Today we begin our Advent journey, beginning a year in which the guiding force in our worship services will be the Gospel according to Mark. We just finished up year A that had Matthew as its focus gospel, and now in year B, Mark is up, and next year when we get to year C, it'll be Luke, and John gets kind of salted in from place to place as appropriate. It's interesting, though, as we take this first step in our journey into Advent, that we read from Mark's gospel, though, because Mark's gospel doesn't begin with a birth story about Jesus. We find those in Matthew and in Luke, but Mark begins with John baptizing in the waters of the Jordan and Jesus coming up to be baptized. We do begin, though, with the words of Jesus himself. When Jesus offers us some statements that seem downright scary on the face of it. But before we turn to those directly, I want to take a minute and give you a little history lesson. Advent, you see, is an ancient celebration of the Christian church, a time of preparation. And much like Lent is before Easter, a series of Sundays of penitence and fasting, so too Advent used to be. We've gotten so used to the idea that as soon as the Macy's parade is over and Santa Claus has arrived, that it's Christmas celebration. But that's not the ancient way of the church. In fact, the purple candles that we light for Advent are a penitential color. We've mostly moved on from that, but that's the underlayer of our celebration of Advent. This week we lit the first candle, the candle of hope. Next week will be peace, and then joy, and finally love. But the original 4 Sunday focuses were heaven, hell, death, and judgment. Yeah, it's not that warm, fuzzy baby in a manger type of season that we've come to know. But it makes good sense then when we retreat to that position of the ancient church to see that penitential season. It makes good sense then to hear the words of Jesus in that context. Jesus speaks using what's called apocalyptic imagery. The image of the sun going dark and the moon refusing to shine, of the stars falling from the heavens. Ancient code language of the Jewish people, who would speak of these present times when the world is broken and hurting, and then turn to view the day to come, the day of the Lord, as the Apostle Paul rendered it, when God would remake things correctly. We find that image in Isaiah's writing as he prepares the Hebrew people for their return from exile in Babylon, when he prays to God, saying, "I would that you would come down and rend the skies, that you would be like a consuming fire that would burn away all that is, as you prepare us for the great homecoming." It's the same image that we find in today's psalm. Again, a plea for God's forgiveness and for a remaking of the world. And so in Mark's gospel, Jesus grabs onto this same language, speaking of trials to come. He says, "In those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the heavens, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken." It tells us to take what's coming seriously, to take it as a message of radical transformation and of hope. And then Jesus begins to explain, from the fig tree, take a lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and it puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you will know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Biblical scholars and historians tell us that as Jesus was speaking these words, he was speaking of a very literal cataclysm to come in the life of the Jewish people. That he was pointing to the year 70, when after a Jewish rebellion, the Romans would come in and level the city of Jerusalem, tearing the temple stone from stone until all that was left is what we know today as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. That the Jewish people would be scattered to the four winds, and with them, the fledgling Christian church. It's a story of an ending, but also of a beginning. An ending of the day that is and the beginning of that day to come. And it's the same message that African Americans sang in the words that we sang just this morning. My Lord, what a morning, when the stars refused to shine. The story of a day to come with the necessity of change, with the promise of hope. And so today, as we take our first steps of Advent, we step forth in hope. Jesus, of course, addresses the central concern that so many Christians have had over the millennia. When is all of this going to happen? And of course, in recent months, we've had our fill of poking fun at a particular radio preacher who keeps guessing and getting it wrong. And I'm going to leave him alone today. But Jesus says, keep awake, for you do not know at what hour the master of the house will come. At midnight, or in the evening, or at cockcrow, or at dawn. Or else he might find you when he comes suddenly. And so what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. I don't know if you've seen the bumper sticker that says, Jesus is coming back, look busy. That is not what Jesus is saying. I remember as a child, my brother and I enjoying ourselves when my parents were away. You know nothing of this, Mom. But the minute we heard the crunch of tires and the gravel in the driveway, it was time to fix stuff. Sofa cushions would go back on the sofa. Those dishes that were sitting on the counter suddenly made their way into the dishwasher. Things that were amiss were put right very quickly. Because something bad happens if the doorknob turns and the parents walk in before things are fixed. And something tells me you all probably had this same experience. There's that playing catch up at the last second that we're tempted to do. That bumper sticker theology that says, we've got to fix it all at once quickly, or else we're in trouble. But Jesus is very clear. No, he says, keep awake. He doesn't say wake up. He says keep awake. Be ready. We're called as God's people to be always about God's business. There isn't a time when we get to slack off. In Jesus' words today from Matthew's Gospel, he gives us this parable that's so much like the parable we heard in Matthew's Gospel just a few weeks ago. That parable of the landowner who went away and left his servants in charge with 5 talents, 3 talents, and 1 talent. But in this one, there's no retribution, there's no counting, there's just the call to be about the master's business at all times, to be awake and aware, so that no matter what happens, we'll be ready. The first Christians, upon hearing these words of Jesus, expected him to return at any moment, probably before lunchtime. Some 2,000 years later, we don't have that hope of an imminent return of Christ, but we live with the expectation that God may break into the world yet again and transform everything, bringing us to the day of Christ. But unlike those who expected an immediate return, we're in it for the long haul, knowing that everything we do is part of a holy call. Sometimes it takes the destruction of the old to bring us to a holy new. This past week, as I'm sure you're all aware, our brothers and sisters at the Saugatuck Congregational Church experienced a horrific fire that left the back part of their church building extensively damaged and their sanctuary unusable. I had the opportunity to be present with them as I was covering for their pastor who was away. And as we walked through the smoke-damaged, water-damaged, fire-blackened building, there was a sense of sorrow and of loss. But as the congregation gathered on Monday night on the front lawn of the church, when the prayer time came, there was a very different feeling among the congregation. People gave God thanks and praise, even in the midst of sorrow. They offered prayers of thanksgiving that the sanctuary had been spared the fire. They offered prayers of thanksgiving for those trustees who years prior had insisted on putting in a firewall. Of course, we here know well of the value of firewalls. In 1919, when our sanctuary burned, it was the forethought of our ancestors who put in the firewall between this and our parish hall that saved most of our building. You can't put in a firewall after the fire starts. It has to be an intentional act of preparation, of planning, of being awake and alert to the possibilities that life brings. Those positive ones of saving things, but also those negative ones of seeing things destroyed. We as God's people are called to be awake, to see what is going on around us in the world, to be prepared with firewalls, to stop destruction before it can happen. We as God's people are called to reach out into a hurting world, to stop problems before they reach crisis level, to speak the truth, to live in hope, and in all these things to do God's work. Today, as we mark the first Sunday of our Advent journey, as we celebrate the gift of hope, may we then be hopeful people, living into God's future together and building that realm of God, one brick at a time. Amen.